God some kind of monster? Before you say no too quickly, think about what we commemorate and even celebrate this week: the tortured to death of Jesus. We say that the death by crucifixion of Jesus, the Son of God, was in accord with the will of God the Father. Doesn't that sound like some form of child abuse? What kind of father would expect such a death of his child? And what kind of people are we who celebrate it? Let's face it, it all looks rather ghoulish at first glance. We might try to avoid the issue by saying that the crucifixion of Jesus was some sort of accident that was not part of God's plan, or that it was the inevitable result of Jesus' confrontation with the religious and political authorities of his day. But the New Testament does not let us use those sorts of comforting evasions. The entire message of the Scriptures is that in going to the cross, Jesus was fulfilling the Father's will. His whole life was a way of the cross to Calvary. Jesus is not the good teacher and healer who was murdered. He is the crucified one who taught and healed. That is the reason the cross is the symbol of Christianity. Ours is the religion of the cross. But why? Why do we say that the death of Jesus, rather than, for example, his healing the sick, is the source of salvation? Wasn't the incarnation, the coming of God the Son among us as one of us, enough? What is the link between his death and our liberation from sin? Perhaps the place to begin thinking about it is to see if there might be some sort of link between death and sin. We often say that death is a result of sin, a punishment for the basic estrangement we have from God, each other, and our true self, that we call original sin. But what if it were the other way around? What if sin were a result of death? Clearly, death is a part of life. All living beings die, even those that do not sin. Death is built into creation. It's the engine that drives evolution, with species and individuals dying to make room for yet others. However, most of creation does not know that it will die. A few animals seem to have some idea of death, but none besides ourselves seem to understand that death is not just something out there. For us humans, death is very up close and personal. In fact, it is something that will happen to me one day, and I know it. The engagingly lively dead in Tim Burton's film The Corpse Bride sing, "Die, die, we all pass away, but don't wear a frown because it's really okay. You might try and hide, and you might try and pray, but we all end up the remains of the day." They say it's really okay, but is it? The comedian Woody Allen said, "I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to be there when it happens." That sort of sums up our situation. We know we will die, and we don't like that. So we do all sorts of things to hide from death and all the limitations that remind us of it in various ways. We become obsessed with looking after number one. We grab for power because if we're powerful, we can make believe death has no power over us. We look for fame and acclaim because we want to believe that we're too important to die. In fact, those were the temptations Jesus faced in the desert. He resisted and went to the cross. Throughout history, we have given in to the temptations. We've allowed death to estrange us from God, one another, and our own true self. Our refusal to face, accept, and perhaps even in some sense embrace death is the ultimate source of sin. And so Jesus comes among us to do what we do not do, cannot do. He goes to death with all the fear and disgust that we have. But he goes with confidence in the love of God that is stronger than death. Because we are aware of death, we can try to avoid it out of fear. But in the cross of Jesus, we now know that because we are aware of death, we can face it with hope, because by his death and resurrection, Jesus has shown us that God's life-giving love does not die. That love is not overcome by death, neither the death of Jesus nor the death of each of us. And so we mark this Holy Week with solemn joy. Death is real, but this week we know that love is even more real.